So I'm going to introduce the speakers in turn, and first is Brid Smith, TD, or the equivalent MP, for People Before Profit, for Dublin South Central. So over to you, Brid.
Okay, great. Do you want me to hold this? Yeah. I'll hold it. Okay. As we say in Dublin when we're embarrassed, we just stop the lights. We had to put up with a lot of this huggy-feely congratulatory stuff on the day in Dublin Castle when the result of the referendum was announced, and it got so bad I had to hug the Minister for Health. So what was I going to say? What was I going to say? Get off me! You know, everybody was hugging everybody and everybody was delighted. But I can tell you, to wake up in a country that is utterly and fundamentally changed forever is a great feeling, and I hope we all live to experience it. It is absolutely wonderful to, go to bed late at night, realise the exit polls are really favouring us, and to wake up the next morning and know that this is it. We beat the bastards. They'll never stick their head up again in the same way, and that we did it. People did it. It wasn't an act of Parliament. It wasn't two great guys called Leo Varadkar or Simon Harris, who went on a journey. Hello, they had a journey. Only a year and a half ago, I have quotes here from them both. I won't waste the time quoting them, but they both explicitly said that they had difficulty with the question of abortion, that they believed that the fetus had a right to life over and above the woman, and therefore they were not pro-choice. Now, a year and a half later, they've gone on a journey, as did many politicians, but by Jesus, it was nothing like the journey that 170,000 women had to do for the 34 years previous. And actually, it was that journey of 174,000 women plus that when those things were spoken about, when people felt the courage and the confidence and the need to talk about what happened to them and their particular situation, why they made that choice and how it affected them, etc. I believe it was that fundamental question and the idea that it must be a woman's right to make the choice, to make the decision, not an ethical, Catholic, moral decision of the individuals who are about to vote, but the woman who faces the crisis pregnancy has to make that decision. And once that message came across loud and clear, we swung the vote by a huge majority of 2/3, and it was some achievement, and it still tastes lovely, and you still keep meeting people who are smiling, how are you, and hugging each other. In fact, the day of the vote and the day before, everywhere you went in Dublin anyway, because I was in Dublin for the days leading up to it, although all of us in People Before Profit everywhere in Ireland, and I'll go into the details of that in a minute, played a huge role in the campaign, but everywhere in Dublin, people were bearing their repeal T-shirts or their yes badges or whatever it was, and walking up to each other like as if, they were wild dogs that had just recognised each other in the wilderness. Look at you! And the tails were wagging and all the rest of it. On the Lewis line, on the buses, people were really excited. And you really felt it in the last few days that this is going to be something, because the cat was out of the bag. Everybody was out proud and shouting. Mammies, grannies, granddads, uncles, everybody was convinced that this was about their daughters and their future and their grandchildren and their future. And Ireland has indeed fundamentally changed. Now, I just want to say a little bit about the campaign, because I'm sure some of you here would like to know what it was like. And Judith said to me, I hadn't actually thought about it in this way, although I'm sure thousands of women and men who knocked on doors in Ireland had thought about it. But when you've been an activist all your adult life for abortion rights, and you go knocking on doors and saying to people, we're here to talk to you about the right to choose, and we'd like to see, have you an issue with, we're voting yes, would you vote yes, and open up a conversation about abortion. Judith was just saying to me, that seems extraordinary that would happen. And I think for probably tens of thousands of younger women in particular, it was extraordinary, an extraordinarily brave step that they took to do that. And I hope in the discussion with people like Marnie Holber, Mary Smith and Tina McVeigh, who are here in the room, who worked really hard to convene the groups at a local level and to give those young women the structures, the organisation, and indeed the arguments and the confidence to feel that they could knock on doors in some of the poorest areas, in some of the not so poor areas, in very white white collar working class areas, and in some very tough areas indeed, that they had the confidence to knock on doors and pose the question, will you vote to give women the right to choose? Now, I have to prefix that by saying that the campaign itself was a conglomerate of all sorts. So, in the beginning, when the referendum for repeal was on the agenda, and really, this is not throwing bouquets at the left, but it would not have been on the agenda in Parliament to give the people a referendum had it not been for left-wing TDs like Claire Daly, who put the prospect of it happening in 2012, followed up by ourselves when we got elected, Ruth Coppinger and myself, constantly pushing, bringing forward bills. We need a referendum for fatal fetal abnormality. We need a referendum for repeal. We need to decriminalise abortion in this country. You could get a 14-year sentence. Actually, you still could technically, because it isn't changed yet, for taking the abortion pill. Before that went on the agenda, there was very little discussion about it until a really, really bad, horrible, ugly tragedy, I hope never happens to any woman again on the planet. When Savita Halapanabar, a young dentist, died in Galway, having consistently requested an abortion because she was going through a serious miscarriage and her body was beginning to fail and her blood was poisoned, and they denied her the abortion and she died. And when her death became public knowledge, it brought tens of thousands of people out onto the streets with the sorrow and the sadness that went with it, but with the anger that said, never again, this cannot happen, we need to get rid of the Eighth Amendment. And just so you understand, the Eighth Amendment was a constitutional mechanism that was used to prevent the medical profession from carrying out abortions and to prevent women from having them. And it did indeed carry a 14-year sentence for either the medical professional or the woman. And so when Savita was dying, doctors took legal advice and decided, based on the legal advice, the constitutional advice, that they couldn't intervene. And this 30-year-old woman, as has often been said, she would be alive today, living in Galway. We wouldn't know her name, and she would probably have a family, were it not for the brutality of the system we live under. And this brought tens of thousands of women onto the street. And again, when the annual Choice March happened, the annual Choice March was happening for a number of years, and it started off quite small, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, but each year it mushroomed. And after Savita's death, it sort of became a massive big fungus almost, because it was like 50,000 people on the streets of Dublin, and then 10,000 in Galway and more all around the country. That then led to the strike for repeal, which was inspired by the idea of the Polish women who came out to fight for their abortion rights. And that was an amazing day. It was International Women's Day 2017. And when we walked from the Dáil up to O'Connell Bridge, there was just like thousands of young women pouring out of colleges, off trains, off buses, flocking onto O'Connell Bridge, and we held up the whole city for the whole afternoon. Nothing happened, nothing moved. It wasn't actually a workers' strike, but it was a strike that stopped everything working. And it was all about repealing the Eighth Amendment. And that was what forced Leo Varadkar, Simon Harris, and later on Micheál Martin, the head of Fianna Fáil, the conservative elements of Irish society, and even later a bit again Sinn Féin, that's what forced them to go on a journey and to realise that it was about time that women had the choice. It wasn't a change of heart, it wasn't a sort of a sit down and think about this. Sure, I'm a great liberal, haven't I, and I should be pursuing the liberal agenda. It was the movement, and it was the movement that forced the vote, and that's the key thing to remember. Organising that movement was difficult, because all of those who had the journey, whether they were Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour, Sinn Féin, ourselves and people for profit, the far left, farmers, doctors, lawyers, and all these groups were formed. Farmers for Choice, Doctors for Choice, Lawyers for Choice, Students for Choice, Gay for Choice. There was all sorts of lobbying and pressure groups being formed. They all became part of the Together for Yes campaign. And within that, the great and wonderful wisdom of the guys who do marketeering and spend lots of time in college to work out how you sell goods and how you market things, drew these massively complicated graphs and came up with the idea that actually we can't talk about choice. It's not a good idea to talk about choice. This was to give cover to the liberal element who don't believe in talking about bodily autonomy, choice, liberation, any of those things. And so we on the left fought very hard with them, argued hard, tried to get it changed. But that didn't really matter, because what mattered was that when it came to the campaign being organised in Roscommon or Rialto or Clontarf or Cork, we were there, and we were giving young women the confidence to say, you speak your language. And if your language tells you that this is about your bodily autonomy and your choice, then that's what you say to people. Don't allow yourself to be uncomfortable or awkward about this. It's your future, it's your life, it's your experience. And that's exactly what they did. They knocked on doors and they said, I want to have a choice in this country. Your daughter should have a choice, your granddaughter should have a choice. Will you vote with me? And once people got that, of course they were going to vote for the future of their children and their grandchildren. In fact, every Red Sea MRBI poll that was taken from 2016 when the referendum was first mooted, sometimes they went like this for the no and that for the yes and all over the place the way polls do, but the one consistent through each of them, when asked the question, do you believe every woman should have the right to make that decision for herself? 62% of the population to 64% of the population consistently said, yes, I believe she should have the choice. And once we broke the barrier of that nonsense marketing, stupid, yes together language and started to talk about choice, that's what the population got, and therefore we got the amazing results. And I do want to say hats off to all of our comrades in the Socialist Workers Party and People Before Profit who gave every ounce of energy they had into that campaign, whether they were in the hardest parts of Donegal or in, you know, the leafy suburbs of Dublin. Every single one of them pulled their weight, and I know for sure that they made a big difference to the outcome of the referendum. So I think it's important to say that. Look, there's also another element to this that, Ireland was always seen as the conservative Catholic country, the Father Ted image and all the rest of it. And indeed, that hasn't fully gone away. You know, only the other day in the Dáil we were arguing about a heritage bill which would allow farmers to slash and burn more of the countryside. And after I argued against the bill, the backwoods men who were all, you know, oh Jesus, save the baby, save life, you know, all that type, got up and said, do you hear Deputy Smith now? She wants to save the hedgehogs and kill all the babies. So they don't get over themselves. They don't get over themselves. But it was nice to be able to say, dry your eyes, you lost that one, and to be shouting across at them. But the other element of this, of course, is that Ireland has changed fundamentally and materially, because when you look back to the recent decades, women have now formed a much more different view of themselves. They play much more of a role in industry, in science, in education. I think it's something like, I just see me, I hate feckin' figures, but something like 78% of women between the age of 25 and 35 are in the workforce. That's a major difference to what it was even when I was a young woman. Your role in life then was to get married and have babies and stay at home and keep getting pregnant and have more babies and stay at home. And an awful lot of that fundamental material view that women have of themselves has changed, and that's why you have those kind of figures. Women now outnumber men in third level education, not by a huge amount. 51% of those in college are women. So that in itself forces a material change. But remember that this was all against the backdrop of a serious decline of the bishops and the Catholic Church. It started with the revelations of the clerical sexual abuse, of bishops having babies and not looking after them and not telling anyone about them. The sexual abuse then, sort of rambled on and on and on, and the revelations were really horrendous, from convents to Christian Brothers schools to industrial schools. And of course there was at the heart of that the idea that women who got pregnant outside of marriage cannot be seen in Irish society. So they stuck them in the Magdalen laundries, enslaved them all their lives, made them work for nothing. And the last Magdalen laundry only closed in 1996. It's extraordinary to think about it. And the mother and baby homes where young pregnant women went and had their children stayed there for a while, but the babies were taken from them. And we've recently discovered, actually it was after the Eighth Amendment we won the Eighth Amendment, that a big scandal came out about the adoption services, where there was a study done by the Minister for Children's Department on the adoption services, and they discovered that most of these children who were born in the mother and baby homes were secretly adopted in America and elsewhere, and their mothers never knew about it, and they never knew about their own origins. And this is another big scandal of the state. And then we also had the Tune babies, of course, a real tragedy, where they discovered, a historian in Galway discovered the bones of nearly 700 babies buried at the back of an industrial school in an old slurry pit, and that is still rumbling on. So the extent of how the Catholic Church and its moral compass was devalued and undermined and thrown down the toilet in Irish society. It's unbelievable how much people just are angry with the bishops, angry with the idea that they have a right to say anything to us about our bodies, our choices, our lives. Really furious with them. I've got a couple of minutes left, and I would like to finish on this, that throughout this campaign, when we talk to people on the doorstep at public meetings, we used to do loads of stalls on the streets, giving out literature and talking to people. We talked about choice as having a two-way dynamic. One should have the right to choose to control one's own fertility and body 100%. And that had to apply to women in Ireland, and that's why the 8th Amendment had to go. But one should also be able to choose to have a family. And that choice is being denied to women in Ireland currently. The fastest growing economy in Europe, the Mr. Liberal Taoiseach, with the Liberal government that will do everything, have more children in homelessness now than in the history of the state. Nearly, what is it, Tina, the figures? 3,500 children, nearly 4,000 children live in homeless emergency accommodation. 10,000 families. Daily, even the day I left to come over here, we are dealing as councillors and TDs with people, entire families, usually women with 2 or 3 children, who are being evicted from private rental accommodation, and the local authorities, the councils, have nowhere to put them. So where do they go? Into hotels and hostels. Fundamentally, if we are to give women real choice, we have to fight to change this. We have to fight for homes, we have to fight for realistic and properly funded childcare. It's nearly as much as a mortgage of a house now to have your children managed on a weekly basis if you need to go to work. We have to fight for contraception. It's hugely expensive. And part of the process when we were bringing this bill forward through Dáil Éireann was to say that there are other issues that feed into crisis pregnancy, and that is not having access to proper sex education. 94% of the national schools are still dominated by the Catholic Church, and they provide sex education, I don't think. They provide Catholic shit to young kids, and they don't tell them about their bodies, their choices, and in particular, they don't help young people around LGBT plus issues develop a consciousness and awareness of themselves, and that leads to a huge issue with mental health. So on all the issues, housing, health, education, access to contraception, childcare, and fundamentally underlying all that, the separation of church and state. We have to move to a situation where we get it out of our system that the church do not dominate health, they do not dominate the education system, they have stopped dominating our lives literally in terms of our heads, and they have to now be systematically taken out of the state services, the public services, the way we do business. But that does mean that we've a long way to go, that we've won a huge amount in winning repeal the 8th Amendment for choice and for equality. But we've still got a huge agenda of choice and equality to follow. And I brought all the leftovers I had from the campaign here. If you want to help us build that campaign for choice and equality, please dip in and leave a few bob afterwards. What we want to do and what we put to our groups up and down the country is that rather than, disbanding the brilliant networks we created with young people and young men and women throughout the country who came out with us day after day, night after night, putting up posters, knocking on doors, doing stalls, etc., who really took a big courageous step. Because it's easy for me, having done it for years, I could do with my eyes shut doing that sort of stuff, but young people took a real courageous step, and we've put it to them that we want to keep this battle going, that the choice and equality networks that exist throughout the country, let's keep them going, let's come together in the autumn when there's a big demonstration organised for equality on housing. Let's stay together for the next choice demonstration in September, because I've no doubt that Mattie McGrath and the Healy Rays and the horrible maggots that are in Dáil Éireann will try to undermine the bill and will try to take back our right to 12 weeks access and other stuff. So that's our message. It's just been an amazing period, as I said at the start. To wake up in your own country and realise it has fundamentally changed for the better is a joy, and it's a joy I think we all still feel every day, and I hope we'll continue to feel it and have lots more victories. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brid. And as Brid said, a lot of the stuff from the campaign she's brought over from Ireland, it's on the stall here, so please do come and check it out at the end of the meeting. I'm going to introduce our next speaker now. That's Judith Orr, a lead member of the SWP, also on the executive committee for the abortion rights campaign in the UK. Judith's the author of a few books that we have here today, quite relevant to the discussion, Marxism and Women's Liberation, and of course Abortion Wars as well. So you can get them at the end of the meeting here, and also at bookmarks on the first floor, I think. So yeah, Judith.
Thank you very much. Well, can I just say that it's an absolute privilege and a pleasure to speak on the same platform as Brid today, and I'm sure I speak for other comrades here from Britain, and I know there's people here from other countries around the world, that all of us who followed the Repeal the Eighth campaign found it the most inspiring and moving and fantastic thing. And really, you know, to have a victory on that scale in Ireland, to be honest, I think it's, you know, we did share in the joy, you know, when that poll came out on the Friday night, and on the day, you know, following it and seeing Dublin Castle, and people saying it was going to be, you know, it couldn't have the joy that met with the equal marriage referendum, because abortion was a bit sort of difficult, and of course there was joy, because it was liberating, and it was something that people felt that they were recognised their own country and their lives were going to be accepted. So it was absolutely tremendous, and it has a ripple effect, which I'll come back to, in terms of Northern Ireland, where I'm from, where abortion is still illegal, and even here in Britain, and I'll come back to that. But I want to talk about somewhere where it's actually going backwards, fundamentally going backwards, and that's in Trump's America. Because on Monday, Trump is going to announce the latest nominee for the Supreme Court, and it is bound to be somebody who's anti-abortion. In fact, one of the people that he's considering is a woman who belongs to a religious cult where the women call themselves, wait for it, handmaids to the patriarch men in the family. Now, she may not be the one who's picked, but she's in the running. And so already there's been one nominee to the Supreme Court that Trump made, and he was straight away, and that meant that a Supreme Court made a decision only a week ago that in California the Supreme Court said it was okay that some clinics didn't tell women the whole truth about the services that were available to them in the state of California. They could lie. So they'll have a clinic that looks like a reproductive clinic for women's health, but it will actually be an anti-abortion organisation who will not tell them that abortion is legal in California, will not tell them that they can get help with funding. And this has now been upheld by Supreme Court with the new majority that even the first nominee by Trump is in. So with the second nominee, people believe that the Supreme Court decision, I mean, abortion is legal in America on the basis of a Supreme Court decision in 1973, which isn't actually about abortion, it's about the woman's right to privacy for family life, which is as part of the Constitution. But if a court cases who come up to the Supreme Court, they've always been held, and that's stayed since 73. And so that's a federal law, which means that women have a legal right to abortion. What states can do, they can't challenge that at the moment, but they've been able to make access difficult. You know, they've said that certain clinics have to be kitted out like small, you know, trauma hospitals, even though most women are going there and taking pills. All sorts of things that have made it difficult. I have a series of interviews at the back of my book. One of them is with an African-American doctor who works at the only clinic in Mississippi, because of the other ones having been closed by state laws. And this is what's happened recently. Currently, 29 states in the US are considered hostile or extremely hostile to abortion rights. 58% of women of reproductive age in the US live in a state that hinders their ability to safely terminate their pregnancy. And 401 abortion restrictions have been adopted by states across the US since 2011, and 71 of those have just been in the past year. And in Iowa, there's currently a legal debate over a new law which says that abortion will not be allowed to happen beyond the time when a fetal heartbeat is heard. Now, that's around 6 weeks. Loads of women don't even know they're pregnant then, let alone know what they want to do about it. And this is state law, which is being challenged by a reproductive rights organisation. And the state's attorney in Iowa, the longest-serving state's attorney in America, he is refusing to defend that law. He's a Democrat who's pro-choice. He says, I will abstain from defending that state law because it goes against women's rights. So that's a battle that's still happening. But this is the level at which the anti-abortion lobby in America has been filled with confidence with Trump and Mike Pence, having got into the White House, because he campaigned to his base, you know, right-wing populist that Trump is, to his base, which was anti-abortion. And so if the Supreme Court gets a case that then means that the Roe versus Wade decision of 73 gets overturned, immediately there are 4 states that would automatically ban abortion. They've got trigger laws ready for if that Supreme Court decision goes. And nearly half of all US states could ban abortion within 2 years. So this is a serious threat. And I think that situation, when we're looking at that, we have to sort of say that this is something that, you know, is linked to how Trump is giving confidence around the world to people who are anti-abortion, who are racist and all the rest of it. But actually, even before a law is changed, there is a difference. Death threats against abortion providers have doubled since he became president. And in terms of the people picketing, and let's remember, picketing, we have some of that in Britain, and it's vile, and it's been inspired by America. But in America, they blockade doors. They actually physically assault receptionists. They have shot dead doctors. They have shot dead receptionists, and even people who help women go in to try to avoid the picketers. And actually, there's been over 78,000 incidents of picketing in 1 year of 2017. This is the highest level since they began recording these in 1977. So this is a polarised fight. It's one that Trump is at the front of, with all his misogyny and everything else. And of course, this hasn't happened without a fight. The magnificent women's marches the day after his inauguration, and again a year later. And when you look at the polls, it's interesting, because there is this polarisation. 2/3 of Americans don't want to see Roe versus Wade overturned. And when you come to women of a reproductive age, it's no surprise that rises to 3/4 don't want Roe versus Wade changed. But it's not just in America where Trump's election has had an impact on women's rights and on their reproductive rights in particular. People will be aware of the global gag. This is something that other Republican presidents have brought in, but Trump has brought it in even harder. And Mary Stopes International, who do a lot of reproductive rights around clinics around the whole world, they issued this week the figures on what the global gag, the impact it's had. Because what happens is the global gag means if you provide any sort of abortion services or advice, you don't get American foreign aid. Even if you use money that you've got from somewhere else, you don't get US aid. So this means, they say, that by the year 2020, 1.7 million people will go without access to their services. 2.1 million unintended pregnancies will happen. 720,000 unsafe abortions will happen. And that would lead to over 5,000 and more avoidable maternal deaths. And already, they say, around 14,000 and more women die every year from illegal and unsafe abortions. Can I just quickly say that when I talk about Trump inspiring others, the far right around Europe have actually often linked the question of abortion with the racism against immigrants. Golden Dawn in Greece say abortions are a crime against the race. In Italy, which is really, Italy has been legal since 73, but actually conscientious objection, which so many doctors do, that there was one woman who had to visit 23 hospitals last year before finding one that would end her pregnancy, because so many doctors say they object to it. But look what the Northern League, and let's remember this is now, you know, who is in control in Italy in terms of the coalition there. Massimiliano Romano, he's a senator with the Northern League, he said, 6 million children have been killed in the womb since 78, when abortion became legal. Then they say we have to import migrants to boost the population. So the two key issues, you know, for the far right, in terms of migration and racism, but also linked to the idea of reproductive rights, of abortion, of social conservatism. Keep that in your mind. In Poland, I know we've got comrades here from Poland, there's still attempts to try and restrict laws that are already some of the most restrictive in the whole of Europe. Worldwide, look at Brazil. There's an average of 4 deaths every day of women in hospitals after illegal and unsafe abortions. Today, 4 women died in Brazil just because they tried to end a pregnancy they didn't want to go on with. And there's a new proposal, 181, which wants to restrict the few legal abortions that happen even more. But there's also positive change. In the last meeting, somebody referred to the fantastic demonstrations in Argentina, where now a law to legalize abortion is now going to the next stage, to the Senate, and tens of thousands of women took to the streets through the night for a debate that actually won that next stage. And so we could be seeing a situation where we're on the brink of reform. It's so fiercely contested. Why is abortion such a fiercely contested issue in the 21st century? We're still talking about this basic fundamental right to control our bodies, to control our fertility. Why is it? Why can't it just be like breast screening or cervical screening, just ordinary part of women's health care? We have to go back, and it is absolutely right back to things that have been discussed at different meetings here, and Brid alluded to it in terms of the whole way that women are regarded in Irish society, in particular, I'd argue, but also it's part of the broader sense of the structures of women's oppression in modern capitalist society. The role that women are expected to play in the family. Now, the family is a contradictory thing. It can be a loving, wonderful thing, a place where you get unconditional support. It can be a place of violence, abuse, neglect, and oppression. But it's the role that women are expected to play. Now, of course, women, the majority of women work most of their adult lives and all the rest of it, whether they've got children or not. But actually, so the family's changed. But to be honest, in an austerity of Europe, it's playing an even more important role because of all the services that are being cut back. The family is still expected. And for the family, read working class women, to pick up the burden. And therefore, what you've got is a situation for women, it's laid out what our natural role is meant to be. We're naturally the ones who are meant to be the child carers because we can bear children, or most of us can bear children. So that sense of we are expected to be the ones who are sort of biologically programmed to know what to do when a baby cries, to be able to be the best person to change a nappy, and also then throughout, whether it's looking after somebody who's ill or the elderly, this is meant to be, isn't it, our natural affinity to these things. So when a woman in some job gets asked, well, how do you cope? You've got children. This comes from somebody who might run a bank or somebody. The men are never asked, how do you cope? You've got children. Because it's just assumed the wife or nanny or somebody else is looking after them. And so having an abortion, wanting to end a pregnancy, is seen as an absolute aberration, isn't it? It's the ultimate betrayal of what women's true natural biological role should be in society. And that's why it's so hotly contested, and that's why it's still an issue, because we're still fighting the very fundamental sense of what women's role should be. And I think that even, for example, here in Britain, where under many conditions abortion is legal, there is still a sense of stigma. There is still sometimes a sense of shame. I mean, I've gone round the last 8 months or so doing talks on my book, sometimes in trade union meetings, sometimes in public meetings, SWP meetings and other meetings and abortion rights conferences and stuff. And I've had people come up to me afterwards and said, I had an abortion. I didn't tell my sister, my best friend. Somebody got up in a meeting and said, I've never said this to this many people at once, but I had an abortion. Other people have said, funny, I said to people at work, I was coming to a book launch about a book about abortion, and we had a discussion we've never had in my workplace about abortion. And this is why I was saying to Brid, the sense of knocking on the door saying, I want to talk to you about abortion. Actually, even somewhere where there shouldn't be a stigma anymore, it actually runs deep. And that is because we keep going to the heart of it's seen as a betrayal of our natural selves. But let's remember how common it is. In Britain, 200,000 women every year have abortions. The majority of those are taking pills before 12 weeks. That's 1 in 3 women will have or have had an abortion in their lifetime. That is completely common, and yet this is something that's treated with a stigma, and you're meant to feel ashamed of it. In actual fact, most people, and I put in the book, the studies show most people feel relief. So I don't actually agree with some even pro-choice campaigners who say every abortion is a tragedy. Now, every abortion is different for people in different circumstances. But the fact is, I think what is the real tragedy is somebody being forced to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term, or who's so desperate, who can't get access to abortion services, will actually take measures to end the pregnancy that could risk and often have risked their own life. That's what life was like in Britain before the 1967 Act, when people threw themselves downstairs, ingested poisons. In fact, lots of the knowledge about poison in modern Britain is because of what women did to end their pregnancies 100 years ago and 50 years ago. That's what life is like. And the only reason, actually, some people say that Ireland was able to pretend that abortion wasn't happening for so long was because, actually, Britain was near. Now, you've got a situation when you're looking at the sense of that, and I interviewed some women who had backstreet abortions pre-67, and also some who had them shortly after, and how people used to treat them in the hospitals, even just after the Act. It was pretty harsh because of how people were told. And I think that's why, when we talk about stigma, how important the stories that women told in Ireland, but clearly how brave it was too to overcome that, and it really had an impact, didn't it, on people. And I think that sense of people being vilified, and I really want to agree with what Brid said about choice, because this idea that it's just about having the right to end an unwanted pregnancy. It's also about the right to have children and be able to economically and have the resources to bring up children as well. I think that's why, thank you, that's why I think it's so important, and I went and wrote quite a bit about the whole thing about forced abortions and the Magdalene laundries and the idea that babies were being sold, weren't they, to America, and the state was helping, facilitate passports for these babies and everything else. And actually, let's remember, this is not just an Irish problem, and it's not just a Catholic Church problem. There were Magdalene laundries here, there was Protestant mother and baby homes as well, and actually, interestingly, within about a year and a half of the 67 Act, there weren't mother and baby homes. Because women had choice, and actually also because of the period, the ideas of bringing up a child on your own began to change. So those who wanted to have their children were more able to do it. But I think that sense of actually understanding that this vilification, that if a woman isn't, you can say the most natural thing in the world is for a woman to have a baby. But woe betide a working class woman who has a child in circumstances that the establishment doesn't agree with. Then they're feckless. Then they shouldn't be responsible. Maybe they should have their child taken away from them. But maybe if you gave them support, financial and otherwise, then people could look after them. But that sense, and actually this has been racism as well. I talk about in this book and my previous one about the racism of the American South, where women went to hospital sometimes for a cyst or something, and only years later found out that they had been sterilized without their knowledge or consent because of what happened. There was one hospital in Mississippi in particular that used to do this to women. And this sense of actually eugenics behind what fertility from the control from the top can be like. This happened to indigenous populations around the world. It happened to people that were deemed feeble-minded in Britain and America, that they were sterilized, forcibly sterilized, because people didn't want them to have children. And we have to see that this is actually how working class women were also treated. They were encouraged not to have children because it was seen that this would lessen the breed, the imperial sort of wanted to have good stock, if you like. It was something that they wanted to clamp down on. So I do think we have to see that if you're poor, that actually it's not just about ideology that you're being attacked for being feckless and everything else. In Britain, for example, the new legislation that says if you're on benefits, a family on benefits, that if you have more than 2 children, you won't get tax credits for your third or subsequent children. And they've recently published the figures on this. 70,000 families in Britain have lost their benefits because of that new law. 70, and guess what? It was called the rape clause, that you're exempted from this if you can tell the benefit officials that one of your children, over 2 children, was a product of rape. And so 190 women have had to disclose to benefit officials that one of their child is a product of rape in order that their benefits don't get taken away from them. What sort of a society do we live in? Because it can be, this idea people might look to Ireland and say, isn't it terrible they didn't get access to legal abortion? We also have to look closer to home at the sort of stuff that's coming down, the cruel laws from our government. Because they can revere the family, revere women in the family, but actually, when they use these cruel laws, it's about making the working class family carry the burden that they don't want to carry with social responsibility for the state, for whether it's education or anything else. They want people to queue at food banks rather than give them proper welfare. And that's why reproductive rights is a class issue. And that's why it's absolutely right. In Britain, every major trade union is affiliated to abortion rights, that why working class people have taken to the streets and defended the Abortion Act, limited that it is, but because it never gave us real choice. It's the only medical procedure. You need 2 doctors to give their consent to you. Most hospitals ask for your consent for something to be done to you. It's the only thing, it's the other way around, and it's actually 2 doctors. But just look at it, you see, I want to finish here. The impact that it's having on the debate in Northern Ireland is fantastic. Because, actually it's funny, because you've got a lot of politicians who now suddenly want to be on the right side of history after the repeal campaign. Yeah. What? Women in Northern Ireland don't have access to abortion? It's like, I'm sorry, we've been telling you this for decades. Now, May had to give in to pay and fund abortions for women from Northern Ireland after she lost her majority in the snap election, and people were so horrified at her getting into bed with the DUP, she was forced to do it. And interestingly, it shows the impact of class, because from 724 before the election, it's gone up to 919 Northern Ireland women came to Britain for abortion. So those are more women coming over because they're getting funding. So it shows what would have happened to those women if they hadn't got funding. But some women can't travel. They've got kids, they've got an abusive relationship, they've got health problems, so the fight has to still go on. And that's why the idea now of saying, we have to do something about what's going on in Northern Ireland, that it is a little backwater where they don't have equal marriage and there isn't right to abortion. And what's interesting, and this is also the effect of the repeal campaign, is it's exposing the fact that law in Britain itself is backward. It's still a criminal. Penal servitude for life if you give yourself an abortion, or a doctor gives you an abortion if it falls outside of the conditions of the 67 Act. We still live under the 1861 Act. It's prehistoric. But this has been exposed by this, and I think we're in a moment, this is where I'll end, we're in a moment where women's rights, Me Too, enough is in the picture, equal pay and all the rest of it, but reproductive rights are central. And the ripples coming from the repeal campaign, which won an argument right throughout society about women's right to control her body, is something that we have to be absolutely taking advantage of here. You know, and say, it's about time we decriminalised abortion in Britain. It's about time those 19th century laws, before women could even vote, let alone be in Parliament, were scrapped and repealed ourselves. Because actually, if we look at it, it's become a political issue of the day. So seize the moment. And really, as socialists, you know, we've got a terrific tradition in terms of reproductive rights and the fight for abortion rights throughout history. We have to say that actually, for us, it's a fundamental part of fighting for women's liberation, isn't it? How can we take part in any struggle in building a new society and fighting for a new society if we can't control our fertility? It's a fundamental right that we have to fight for, and actually, so absolute hats off to the Repeal the 8th campaign, everybody who fought, and we want to take advantage of that moment and that opportunity that it's helped bring and fight to decriminalise and make abortion rights something that is just part of women's general health care like it always should have been.
Thanks very much, Judith. What a brilliant introduction. We're going to open up to the floor now for a discussion. So just to say, if you want to make a contribution, if you just raise your hand, indicate by raising your hand, and I'll gesture to you. If you want to come up to the front to make the contribution, that would be good. You can use the mic. I'm going to call you in twos as well, just to save time. So after maybe 2 minutes, I'm going to tap on the desk. After 3, you'll be asked to leave the festival. Just kidding. No, you'll be shot. No, just kidding. Just really please try and keep it to 3, because we want to get as many people in as we can.
I want to start by congratulating RTDs. I'm obviously, as you can gather from my accent, not a resident of this state any longer. I live in Ireland. Congratulations to People Before Profit, to Brid and the comrades who struggled very hard to get this legislation moved. Very quick anecdotes, and I'll tell you why. In 1977, when I first came over here, we were still bringing contraceptives into the country illegally, which my wife had been doing for some 10 years before. In 1979, in the county of Tipperary, there wasn't a chemist who would provide you with a contraceptive. And if you were lucky enough to find one, you had to have a doctor's certificate to get it. The coil was illegal. All this is due to the Catholic Church, because Charles McQuaid, the bishop, in conjunction with De Valera, in 1937 introduced all this rubbish into the Constitution. The only thing that we're faced with now is, despite our wonderful victory, we have the problems of implementation, and we have to continue with the struggle to make sure that we get it. Abortion should not be in any part of the Constitution. It should be nothing to do with politicians. It should be purely the choice of the individual concerned. Free, available, legal. Thank you.
The point that Brid made about people before the vote having made up their mind 5 or 6 years before, 3/4 of the people had made up their mind before in Ireland, is really, really important, because it destroyed a myth that the Irish people are somehow conservative. No, they have a repressive state institution and repressive politicians that had stamped on it, plus a repressive another institution, the Catholic Church. And that's so important for the struggle for abortion rights elsewhere. Because Judith's absolutely right. It's the alt-right that are getting the wind on the thing. But we have to remember, under Obama, it was also the case that 33 restrictive abortion laws were passed in 13 states. And so what you have here is, even though Ireland seemed like an exception, it is the extreme end of a system that has put women down in all sorts of ways. And that's so important. Now, from our point of view, the resistance that has been so fantastic, I can't tell you how transformative it has been for all of us, because although we were at the centre of it, the revolutionary socialists were at the centre of it, people before profit were at the centre of it, we also, that word self-activity was never more evident. In our group in Dublin Bay North, for example, a young woman of 17 who actually couldn't vote because she was too young, suddenly stepped into the limelight, spoke at public meetings. She was doing her leaving cert at school, took time off school. She wasn't even voting. She just wanted to be part of it. Subsequently, of course, she has actually joined People Before Profit, as have many people from the campaign. We have 60 or 70 people from the campaign. So this can transform the left. But two things are really, really important. The type of resistance that Brid has spoken so inspiringly about is the type of resistance that will push it back. And the bankruptcy of the mainstream liberal feminists are really very important. In Ireland, the mainstream liberal are trying to claim this as their victory. It wasn't their victory, as Brid has explained. They came in lately, they were the Johnny-come-latelys of the thing, they were anti-abortion, etc., etc. But we have to understand that this is part of a system, capitalist system, that puts women down. Inequality has got worse. There's no automatic march to gender equality. So in order to win women's liberation, you have to be anti-capitalist and have revolutionary socialist politics.
Yeah, I'm just actually overwhelmed listening to like the reaction of you guys when Brid was outlining the kind of the repressive Catholic state that we've lived in all our lives, and the gasps coming from you all. I just actually got really emotional because I went, Jesus, like we have become desensitized to the kind of shit that we had to put up with. I don't have an abortion story, but I do have a story of childhood sexualized trauma. And I was silenced and shamed and not allowed to be spoken about. I wasn't allowed to speak about it. I was drugged to keep me quiet as a child. But on the morning after we won the repeal victory, for the first time in 50 years, I stepped outside of my house and my head was held high. We beat the bigots, but the fight is not over yet, but we're well ready for them now. But I just wanted to say, well, speaking of the bigots, the Pope is coming to Ireland, which... and he doesn't matter anymore. They think he matters, but they actually timed this international conference of the family. I mean, what even is that? An international conference of the family to take place in Ireland. Now, I don't think it was that contrived, that the referendum date, and then they said it was kind of a coincidence. But the point is, they chose Ireland at a time when the repeal campaign was at its height. And just goes to show you like the lengths that they will go to. And here's a little laugh for you as well. We have a hosepipe ban in Ireland because of the hot weather. And that came into effect last Monday. On Monday afternoon, council workers were out spraying this massive big white cross that we have in the Phoenix Park that was there since the 70s when he last came, hosing it down. That was put up by wealthy Catholic capitalists. But just very quickly, I just want to make, again, a reference to the point about the language of the campaign and the importance of having revolutionary socialists at the heart of all social movements. Because when this Together for Yes campaign, they actually issued a manual which was this thick of what we could and couldn't say. And to be honest with you, we just kind of went, yeah, whatever. And when we went out into the campaigns, like there was one night that we had about 60 people turned up to canvass in one small part of the area that myself and Brid represent. And like because we were there and we were leading the campaign, leading the canvass, we're able to say to people, listen, when you knock on the door, like you're here for a reason. Most young women told me that they came out because they had anti-abortionists and anti-choicers on their doorstep, and they realised arguing with them that they're well able for it, so they came out to canvass, saying to them, you just use the arguments that you are, which is the reason that you're here. And for them all, it was choice. And the reason why we know this, the reason why the People for Profit in particular, but the left groups involved, the reason why we know what people want and what people motivates people is because we're the ones that have been working with people on the streets for all of those 35 years that the amendment has been in place. It's been the left parties, the radical left parties that have been on the ground listening to people, and we trust people. We trust people to run society. We trust women to know what they want. We trust women to have choice. And our arguments won that, and we were at the heart, and we were at the heart of it. And I just want to pay a special credit to Brid and to Marnie, because they have been fighting the battle in Ireland for the last 35 years. And Mary Smith, I don't know if she's here in the room, they have been beating, there you are, Mrs. beating down the path. So absolute, total respect and to the comrades, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have these shoulders of giants to stand on.
I just want to come back to the point about politicians who jumped on the bandwagon to claim a victory that was none of theirs. The Brid talked about the right-wing politicians, our Minister for Health and our Taoiseach, the equivalent of the Prime Minister. They were kind of made the poster boys by a media who are from the same class as them, basically. So they were the ones who did try to elbow out the far left, and as Tina just said, it was the far left, ourselves and others, that were actually the backbone of the campaign. But just a little bit about the soft left, the Irish Labour Party. The Irish Labour Party, in conjunction, or rather in coalition 6 years ago with the right-wing party, brought in a piece of legislation called the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act. This was in response to a demand for do something after the death of that woman that Brid described, Savita Halappanavar. So they did something. They brought in an act that would give you 14 years for taking an abortion pill. This was their great, token of mercy. The basis on which it was merciful was that you could get an abortion if you were suicidal enough. And 28 women proved themselves just about that they were suicidal enough in a year. There's 12 women a week coming to England for an abortion, daily, or taking an abortion pill. So this was their great act of solidarity with women, the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act. Brid brought an amendment, or tried to bring an amendment before the Irish Parliament to reduce that 14-year sentence to a €1 fine, just to, decriminalise it effectively. Every bloody left-winger and right-winger and Sinn Féiner in that thought, not every, all the soft left, the Labour Party types, voted against that. And then, of course, now that we've had the victory, they're all on the bandwagon. So, you have to remember where it lies. Who are the real champions? It relies on people like you. It relies on a hard left to make sure that the arguments are brought through, and that a campaign that is fought by young women, they can then have the sense of ownership after the fact, because that is what they do have. They know that despite the bullshit from the bandwagon, the jumpers on the bandwagon, that despite that, it was their victory. And that allows them to go on and make common cause for a real demand for equality. Control over your fertility allows you to make, obviously, the first step in equality for a woman. How can you control your life if you can't control your fertility? But how can you have real choice if you don't have equality? So now we can make the argument to them, you have to keep moving left in order to get equality and not just choice.
Yeah, congratulations to the Irish comrades. It was a fantastic inspiration for us in Poland. When the victory was clear, we had our anti-capitalist weekend just the same time you had the referendum, and we were over ourselves with joy. Brid talked about how the protest in Poland inspired the Irish protests, and vice versa, of course. For us, it's extremely important, and there's also, of course, very many common features between Poland and Ireland when it comes to the power of the church, especially. We have very many similar situations like you've had. We've had women dying because doctors have failed to refuse to give them medical treatment because they were pregnant and they were afraid that the fetus might be damaged. We have had women being forced to give birth to a fetus that was basically they knew would die very soon after the birth. We were forced to go through with the pregnancy and give birth. So we have very many similar situations. We have women being lied to about prenatal, examinations, because the doctors won't tell them that actually there is something wrong with the fetus, because then there will be a problem about abortion, etc. So, but we also have a difference with the Irish situation, because we actually have 4 to 5 million Polish women that have had abortions, because abortion has been legal before in Poland. So that experience is there among women, and when the anti-abortionists basically call the women murderers, that people react to that. Yeah. Okay. So I have to speed up. So we had fantastic protests, and we forced back the government now altogether 3 times. First, they wanted to ban abortion totally, basically, and give a 5 years prison sentence. The laws are already very, very restrictive, but this was even more restrictive. Massive protests, the black protests and women's strikes forced them to retreat on that. But they didn't give up, and they came back with a new proposal that was not as extreme, but basically would ban 95% of all abortions, because it was when the fetus is seriously damaged would be banned. Again, there was a massive mobilization. What happened was that the bishops came out and said to the parliamentarians, you have to speed up this law into parliament, you have to take it up into parliament, and in record time it was up in parliament, and in record time we also protested and forced them back again. And now in June again we've forced them back for the 3rd time. Yeah. So I think activists in Poland now see that what we thought was really impossible just a couple of years ago is possible.
I just want to say that what they've done in Southern Ireland changes everything. It's absolutely massive. It changes everything. Judith's talk about the battles of women in America and the rest, very, very serious. I think Ireland will be a beacon for them. But what I want to talk about is what we're doing here, that really it is now the first chance we have ever had to go beyond the 1967 Abortion Act. And the anti-abortionists are not going to give up easily. They are organising. They are always completely and utterly bankrolled. They're loaded. They always have lots of money. I think we've now got to take this really seriously. There's an urgent need now that we build a movement to win our rights for abortion in this country. And actually, that means we look, first of all, I think, to our trade unions. We won the argument in the trade unions in the 70s and the 80s because abortion is so clearly a class issue, because it's always working class women who end up in the back streets, hurt and all the rest of it. If you've got money, you can get an abortion, whatever the law. That was why we won it as a class issue. That's why we won it in the trade union. We have 6 million trade unionists in this country. I think we have to look to mobilising those people in defence of abortion and to push it forward. And also we need to get their money that our trade unions have to bankroll. Abortion rights runs on a flipping, shoestring. They've no money, right? This is the organisation that is leading the fight. We need to get them the money. If you are in a union, affiliate. Get your union. It won't be difficult to get the money. If you're in this room and you are not affiliated to abortion rights, go home, go on the website and affiliate it. You see, because revolutionary women in this country, we have always been a part of the fight for a women's right to choose in this country. And I think now we're in a really good position to carry that forward. We are in abortion rights. We can shape it. But that means we have to show we're serious. And that means we know how to build, we get the unions on board. And actually, we win the right, not for 2 doctors to tell me whether I can have an abortion, but I should have an abortion because I say I want one.
I think for me, like, watching over here, it's incredible to see the campaign, and I was constantly keeping an eye on it just to see what was happening, and like people were unsure about the percentage. But it was absolutely amazing to see the result come out on that night. But one thing that I remember, like when you talk about the slogan about the woman's right to choose, I remember a picture on Instagram with a woman wearing a headscarf, and he said a woman's right to choose if she has an abortion, a woman's right to choose if she wears the headscarf. And I think that was incredible, like to make that link between both campaigns was something necessary. And like when you see in this government the Islamophobia that the Tories use and the sexism, a while ago a Tory MP tried to say Muslim women or Asian women shouldn't have the right to have an abortion because they were selective if it was a girl or a boy. That's the way they were going to go down. And these are the people who are in our government and in our power. And you see people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who had 6 kids, who's never changed the nappy, and then says, like, oh, women should have the right to abortion, but yet also profit from abortion pills at the same time. This is our government that we have. And I think it's important that we constantly fight back, and working women are on the street against it, because when it's like it's the people coming together and fighting back, like the whole notion of a woman in power is going to be the one that changes things. Theresa May is in power. Theresa May stops women from having abortion in the sense that if you have abortion, you need a day of work. Like if you work on a 0-hour contract, you need that day. You can't take a sick pay because you might not even get a sick pay. You can't take time off work. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sure. I think it's important that we have to mobilise for a woman's right to choose in any sense what she wears, what she does with her body, her right to work or not to work, or her right to have a leisure time, and also to be on the streets fighting for people to have a better equality at work and better chances and better pay, to actually make, when we say person's right to choose, we have to be providing people the opportunity to choose and giving them a range of choices to have, instead of just saying you have the right to choose but there's nothing really to choose from because you're like stuck in this box. So we have to be also mobilising for that as well. Thank you.
Just going to bring the speakers back in to sum up just now. Brid.
Okay. I think probably the thing about the referendum in Ireland that most striking is that it was won by popular suffrage. It wasn't dictated to from above and handed down by lawyers or a court or even a parliament. It was actually a popular vote. It was a bit like an election. So I think that's quite unique. In fact, I think it is unique in the world to vote in abortion on that basis. But I don't think that it can be just exclusive to Ireland, because a struggle isn't about ending up with the product being a vote. It's about ending up with the product being the choice that you wish to make. Now, and like I say, I just want to say that's not inevitable, and it does require the intervention of socialists, of revolutionaries, of people who fundamentally understand how society changes, that it is not about great lawyers and judges and men on journeys, that it is about the change coming from below. And if you understand that, then what you don't do is get all upset and etchy and tetchy with horrible people from the Labour Party or traitors from Fine Gael who you have to work alongside. There's 2 of them, but there's another 100 young people that you're working with. So you have to remember, it's the young people I'm speaking to, it's the young people I'm working with. So if somebody comes along and says to you, as the Together Yes campaign did, certain language resonates with the middle ground and some of it does not. See a list of words and phrases that are useful and some that are not. Avoid choice, on demand, without restriction, free, right to choose, on request, bodily autonomy. Do not use these words, right? Now, or you could have some fart from the Labour Party telling me that my argument about choice was reductionist, and you could lose the head with them at meetings and, blow everything out of the water and leave the Together for Yes campaign. Yes, you can have it, just share of them. But the one thing we understood was that the Together for Yes campaign was made up of ordinary, decent people, men and women, particularly women, who didn't have this baggage and didn't believe this nonsense. And so when that was trotted out by those of us who'd like to see us dead, basically, who hate the revolutionary left. We smiled. Yes, yeah, you're right, of course. But we stuck the knife in their back by working with the young people and saying, you talk about choice and bodily autonomy. That's your right. You talk about your experience. And that's what won the day, and that's what was carried. It really did carry the campaign. Judith made reference to this appointment that Trump is about to make. And interestingly, on the way over today, I was reading a column in the Irish Times by a woman, an absolutely horrible woman, called Maria Steen, who was one of the best advocates of the anti-choice side in this campaign. She has 4 children that she homeschools. She's a multimillionaire, and I believe she attends Mass every morning in Rathgar, one of the poshest suburbs of Dublin, with a black mantilla over her face and her 4 kids going along like this. She's an absolutely horrible old cow, and she was vicious towards us. What was her article about this morning? She was singing the praises of this potential appointee from Trump. Absolutely wonderful woman, this very Catholic woman, you know, and she doesn't compromise her Catholicism for nonsense. She's a brilliant woman, and Maria Steen can't wait. She's wetting herself to see this appointee of this justice of Donald Trump's. So the importance of it being a global attack on us and a global fight for us to push back against them. I think you really get it from Judith's book. It's a brilliant book, and I'm just going to plug it. If you haven't read it, do so. We're going to plug our things as well. Not in our shoes and our badges, if you want to have a look at our stall at the end. But I do think the global picture is extraordinarily important, because this, you know, I just said there, what's the name of the Margaret Atwood who wrote The Handmaid's Tale? It's a difficult thing to watch, and I find it's difficult to watch because it's fucking true. It's close to the truth. And but knowing that it's close to the truth means that we have to organise very, very well and know how to work with those who are not fully won to our politics, but who are won to fighting and who want to see the change that's required and who want to see the right kickback. We have to, and it's taken us years to learn it, but we have to learn how to work with people who are to the right of us, but they're not Attila the Hun, if you know what I mean, and pull them to the left. And we can see huge victories. Look, I've enjoyed the meeting hugely. And I think that I'm really proud to know that we've had the impact. I didn't realise that people were so well aware of what it meant to us in Ireland to have such a victory. And I do believe that this is a small enough planet, although it's burning to bits. We do have a war to win, and we can win it together. And thank you very much for all your support.
Thank you. Well, that was a terrific meeting. I'm sure we could have gone on for a lot longer, because really this is an issue that affects everybody. You know, actually the whole thing of humans trying to separate procreation from sex goes back the whole of human history. Because actually, unlike some other people in the other parts of the animal kingdom, we don't have sex for fun, not just to procreate. I mean, chocolate might be to some church leaders, but that's actually the case. And so therefore, this is not something new. This is not something that's always been associated with women's oppression. This goes right back. And again, you know, look back about the history of how people have tried to separate their fertility. But I think when we look at it today, that in Britain, it's deeply entrenched the idea that we have access to legal and safe abortion, with all the problems that it's not real choice. It's deeply entrenched, and it became so very quickly after the 67 Act. I mean, the first big demonstration I marched on defending the 67 Act was in 1979, me and a bunch of students. We've still got the photographs of us all wearing ridiculous 1970s clothes on this. And it was 80,000 people. It was the biggest defence of abortion rights ever seen in this country, since or before. And it was organised by the TUC. You know, and I've been on candlelit vigils that were women only and all the rest of it around that time. What whacked it? It was the TUC, it was the trade unions, it was a collective organisation of women and men. Some of the unions didn't even have any women members. They marched that day. And that is the force that we have to call on. And I tell you what, you know, the tactics the anti-abortionists use in Britain are different. You know, they don't just, I mean, Rees-Mogg does, but, you know, most of them don't just say, I'm all out against all abortions. They say, I want to protect disabled people. And so if you're saying that there's fetal abnormalities, that's being anti-disabled. You don't see them fighting against, you know, the cuts to independent living alliances or anything like that. But actually they say this. So there's a bill even going through the Lords at the moment. It won't get anywhere, but actually it's about trying to drag it back. And then when Naima referred to the sex selection bill, I tell you what, that threw people. It threw the feminists even in the pro-choice movement. Because it said, in here, the far-right in America use it, and they planned it. They said, we'll get those feminists. We'll say it's about girl babies being aborted, and surely you can't be for that. You know, and actually some people said, oh dear, but this is about women being oppressed and second-class citizens. And socialists on the exec and within the movement had to fight hard and say, no, this not only has a racist agenda because it's about certain parts of the population, and actually, by the way, there was no evidence that this was happening anywhere in the population. The numbers did, you know, the Times had the lost girls and everything else. It was rubbish. But that was used. But also it's that sense of actually we have to start with the individual, with the woman herself and say it's her body. She's not a walking incubator. And she's not for you to impose her... Everybody will have their own reasons. And actually some doctors at various conferences here have talked about how they've been told they maybe shouldn't, if a Muslim woman comes in and wants to have a scan, that maybe they shouldn't tell her the sex of the fetus in case she wants to have an abortion on the basis of sex. Even though there's no evidence, and even though the law was smashed in the end, because we won an argument amongst the pro-choice MPs and the pro-choice movement that this was both sexist and there's nothing liberating about being told to have your... So therefore we've got to be aware of the tactics, you know, that they use different ones where it's harder. And when it comes to what we're doing now, I've only got a minute, I think that sense of actually... The DUP scuppered the last chance for legal abortion in Northern Ireland when Labour did a deal with them, remember, because they wanted to extend, you know, to 40 days how long they could, you know, hold on to so-called terror suspects. And so the DUP are now standing in the way of it today. And just for the record, let's note, 2 women leaders, Arlene Foster and Theresa May, you know, so they're not our sisters. You know, this is about class, this is about something else, and this is why we have to look to our own side. And I think that when we talk about, you know, how do we find what we're going to do? I think it is a bit of a call to arms. Because when I said this is an opportunity, that the ripples from repeal, the ripples from the anger against Trump, and let's hope there's a magnificent march here in London on Friday. Whoever he appoints on Monday, let's march and tell him they can F off from here, because we don't want him. But that sense of actually saying this is an opportunity for us, all those people are jumping on the bandwagon like they did in Ireland to say, to be on the right side of history. Well, we can be a bit pissed off the fact they haven't noticed till now, but we should use the chance and say, yes, come on then, let's do it. It is time. And it's also time to get rid of the criminal law. And I just think this is something that we can be a part of in a big way and actually see it as absolutely part of this really burgeoning mood that there is, that women have had enough of being treated as second-class citizens in every area of life. And this is a fundamental part of it. It's not some difficult subject out there that's all about morals and individual conscience. It's not. It's a class issue. It's an issue about our bodies. And if we don't fight for control of that, then nothing else is possible. And we want, you know, social society isn't just going to be a place where we've got a right to control our bodies. It's about how we control all our lives as women and men. And that's what we in the SWP are fighting for. I hope you'll join us. I hope you'll come and look at this campaign and be inspired by the struggle. Change can happen, but it takes people to make history. It doesn't just happen on its own. And that's what happened in Ireland, and that's what we want to see elsewhere.